Welcome back to the deep dive. Let's start with a mental image. When you think of a huge financial crime, what do you see?
You're probably picturing something from a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
A team of guys in masks, they're drilling into a vault, or maybe a hacker in a dark hoodie, green code just raining down the screen. It's all very cinematic.
High stakes, action-packed, and almost entirely fiction.
Right.
At least that's not how the real financial war is being fought today, not at all.
Exactly. The real war, it isn't happening in the vault. It's happening in, a spreadsheet. It's happening in some poor compliance officer's email inbox.
Or in the fine print of a KYC form.
Yes, in those seemingly boring administrative details. And when those details get missed, the consequences they're explosive.
We're talking about fines in the millions, businesses being digitally erased from the internet, major banking entities being brought to their knees.
And that is the absolute focus of today's deep dive. We are cracking open the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, the PMLA, but we're not just going to, recite the law at you.
No, that would be incredibly dry.
We're looking at it through a very specific, I think, very practical lens. Chapter 7 of the NISM IFSCA certification course.
Which I know, it sounds like the most boring title for a document ever created. Chapter 7, but what it really is, it's a collection of enforcement orders.
It is.
It's basically a horror story anthology for compliance professionals. It's where you go to see the bodies.
That's a great way to put it. It details the specific cases where the Financial Intelligence Unit India, that's FIU-IND, and the International Financial Services Centers Authority, or IFSCA, where they stepped in and just said, enough.
And we have 5 really distinct cases to unpack today. They run the gamut from, crypto giants all the way down to empty offices.
And massive gambling syndicates. We can't forget that one.
Oh, that one's the big one.
And the mission here is to get past the headlines. We really want to understand the mechanics of the failure. Why specifically did Bybit get fined 92 million rupees?
And how in the world did Paytm Payments Bank completely miss a foreign gambling ring that was operating right under its nose?
And my personal favorite, what does it actually mean when a regulator visits your office 4 times and finds absolutely no one there?
The case of the ghost office. It's almost comical if it weren't so serious.
It really is. We'll get there. But before we start walking through these crime scenes, we need to establish who the sheriffs are in this story.
Right.
We have 2 acronyms that are going to come up again and again, FIU-IND and IFSCA. So give us the primer. Who are they and how are they different?
Okay, so think of it like this. You've got the intelligence brain and you have the zone enforcer.
Okay, I like that. The brain and the enforcer.
The FIU-IND, the Financial Intelligence Unit, is the brain. It's the central national agency. It's responsible for receiving, processing, analyzing, and then, disseminating information related to any suspect financial transactions.
So they're the ones connecting the dots. They're looking at the big picture data from all over the country.
Correct. They are the central repository for all the suspicious transaction reports, the STRs. So when they issue a penalty, it's usually because a company, a reporting entity, failed to feed that intelligence network.
They cut off the blood supply to the brain.
That's a perfect analogy. Yes. You're blinding the system.
Okay, got it. So that's the brain. What about the zone enforcer, the IFSCA?
So the IFSCA is the unified regulator specifically for the International Financial Services Center, the IFSC, at Gifty City in Gujarat.
Gifty City, right?
Yeah.
That's India's big push to compete with,
Yeah.
like Dubai or Singapore.
Yeah, precisely. And because it's this special economic zone, it needs a special unified regulator. So the IFSCA basically holds the combined powers of the Reserve Bank of India, of SEBI, of all the big players, but only within that specific jurisdiction.
So if you're operating in Gift City, the IFSCA is your boss.
They're your only boss.
And if you're operating anywhere else in India, the FIU-IND is watching your data.
Exactly. And the weapon that they're both wielding in all of these cases we're about to discuss is the PMLA, specifically a little piece of it called Section 12.
We see Section 12 cited in pretty much every single penalty order we have here.
Yeah.
So let's unpack that. It's not just a rule, right? There's a philosophy behind it. What is Section 12 really about?
Section 12 is, it's the absolute bedrock of the financial audit trail. In the entire world of anti-money laundering, if it isn't documented, it might as well have never happened.
Okay.
So Section 12 mandates 3 core things for every single reporting entity, and that could be a bank, a stockbroker, a casino, doesn't matter.
And what are those big 3?
1, verification of identity. You absolutely must know who your client is, full stop.
Know your customer, KYC.
The very same. 2. Maintenance of records. You have to keep a clear history of where the money came from and where it went. And 3, the big one, reporting. You must tell the FIU if something looks wrong, if it looks suspicious.
Identity, records, reporting. It sounds so simple when you lay it out like that.
It sounds incredibly simple. But as we are about to see in these cases, in the real world of high-speed digital finance, maintaining that quote-unquote simple discipline is precisely where everything falls apart.
So Section 12 is what creates the transparency.
Yes, the very transparency that criminals hate. So if you break Section 12, whether you mean to or not, you are essentially helping the criminal hide their tracks. You're holding the door open for them.
Which brings us, I think, perfectly to our first case. This is a story about a company that basically tried to opt out of Section 12 entirely. We are talking about the crypto giant Bybit FinTech.
This is such a landmark case for the virtual digital asset sector, or VDA sector. Bybit FinTech Limited is a massive global platform.
Huge.
Yeah, they let people buy, sell, trade crypto assets. They're a major player.
And they were operating in India.
Oh, heavily. They were actively onboarding Indian users. They were facilitating rupee transfers. They were acting as a major exchange for the Indian market. But they had a very particular strategy.
Which was what?
If we don't register, the rules don't apply to us.
The old, if I can't see you, you can't see me. Defense. A classic.
A very bold and very foolish classic. You see, the PMLA was updated specifically to include VDA service providers, crypto exchanges, as reporting entities.
So there was no ambiguity.
None whatsoever. In March 2023, the official guidelines came out. Then in October 2023, a circular was issued, which was essentially the government saying, this is your last call. If you are a crypto exchange dealing with India, you must register with the FIU-IND now.
And Bybit's response to that last call was?
Crickets. Silence. They just ignored the mandate. They continued to onboard Indian users, process transactions, all without officially registering as a reporting entity.
So let's spell out why that matters so much. If they don't register, what's the consequence?
Well, if you don't register, you're not on the regulator's radar. You're not subject to their audits. You're not filing any suspicious transaction reports. You effectively become a black hole for financial intelligence.
You become a safe haven for dirty money because no one is watching the front door.
Precisely. And the FIU-IND, they did not view this as some simple administrative slip-up. Their exact wording was persistent and continuous noncompliance.
So they saw it as deliberate.
Oh, absolutely. They saw it as a calculated business strategy to bypass Indian law while profiting from Indian consumers. It was a choice.
And the crackdown, when it came, was incredibly severe. This wasn't just a letter in the mail saying, please comply.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The FIU-IND went, for lack of a better term, they went nuclear. They sent a request to the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology to block Bybit's URLs in India.
Wow. That is the digital death penalty.
It is. It's the kill switch. If your customers can't reach your website, you don't have a business anymore. It forces the issue, immediately.
And on top of having their site blocked, there was the fine.
A massive one. They levied a fine of 9.27 crore rupees.
So that's roughly 92.7 million rupees.
That's right.
Which is a staggering amount of money for essentially not filling out a form.
But you have to look at what that form represents, By not registering, Bybit was violating Section 12(1) on record maintenance. They were violating Rule 9 on client due diligence. They were, as you said, operating a shadow bank.
So the fine had to be big enough to make that business model unprofitable.
Exactly. The penalty has to wipe out any profit advantage you gain from non-compliance. Otherwise, what's the deterrent?
It sets a massive precedent. It's basically the government saying the Wild West era of crypto in India is officially over. You are either inside the tent, you're following the rules, or you are blocked from the market.
And it also sends a powerful signal that being global or decentralized is not a legal defense. If you touch the Indian financial system, if you onboard Indian consumers, the PMLA applies to you, period. End of story.
So that's the high-tech digital evasion. No, I want to pivot completely. Let's go to the low-tech, almost absurdly physical evasion. This takes us to Gift City and the case of the ghost offices. This involves an entity called NEO Asset Management.
This case is it's fascinating because it highlights the critical difference between form and substance.
What do you mean by that?
Well, on paper, NEO Asset Management had everything in order. They had the license from the regulator, they had a registered address in the special economic zone. In form, they existed.
But the IFSCA, the zone enforcer we mentioned, decided to, what, just drop by, to check if they existed in reality.
They conducted a surprise inspection, July 31st, 2024. The inspectors go to the registered office address on file, and they find nothing.
Nothing, like was the door locked? Was it an empty room with a folding chair? What does nothing mean here?
The source material describes it as the absence of principal officer and key management personnel. So essentially, the lights might be on, but nobody's home.
So the people who are legally responsible for running the fund, the people who are supposed to be ensuring compliance,
The mind and management of the company.
it just weren't there.
Not a soul.
Okay, but, I mean, maybe they were all out for lunch. Maybe it was a team building day at a bowling alley. You know, there could be an explanation.
That might fly for one visit. Maybe. But regulators, they are nothing if not thorough. They came back on August 21st, 3 weeks later.
When?
Still no principal officer, still no key management.
Strike two. Okay, so what does the regulator do now?
At this point, the IFSCA sends a formal advisory letter. This was in September. They spelled it out very clearly. They said, look, we visited twice. You weren't there. This is a problem. You have 4 weeks to appoint a principal officer and get your house in order.
That seems incredibly lenient. It's not a fine. It's a warning. Here's a month to hire someone and put them in the office.
And this is the part of the story where it just gets baffling.
Oh, it gets worse.
Much worse. NEO Asset Management did not reply. They didn't acknowledge the email. The regulator even sent a physical registered letter to the office address, and because no one was there to sign for it, it couldn't be delivered.
So they effectively ghosted their own regulators. I don't understand the strategy here.
Yeah.
Your financial institution, your entire business relies on this license to operate. Why on earth would you ignore the very person who gave you that license?
It really only suggests one of two things, right? Either it's a level of incompetence that is just staggering, or the entity was a shell from the beginning, a placeholder with no real operations.
A ghost company.
Pretty much. So the regulator, undeterred, went back a third time in October.
Well, I guess.
Still empty. And then a fourth time just a week later, for good measure.
Still empty. So that's 4 visits, 0 people.
At that point, the violation is just undeniable. You cannot possibly comply with the PMLA if you aren't physically present. You can't monitor transactions. You can't assess client risk. You can't maintain records if there isn't a single human being in the jurisdiction to actually do the work.
So what was the final penalty here? I mean, after all that.
In this specific order, they were issued a formal warning. Now, I know that sounds light, especially compared to Bybit's 92 million rupee fine, but you have to understand, for a fund manager, a formal regulatory warning is a permanent stain on your reputation.
It's a black mark.
It is. It signals to the entire market, to all your potential investors, that you are not a serious player. It kills your credibility.
It reinforces the idea that you can't just, buy a plaque for the wall, rent the broom closet, and call yourself a bank.
Exactly. The IFSCA is trying to build Gift City into a world-class financial hub. They cannot afford to have it filled with these kinds of shell companies. They need substance, they need real operations, real people, real compliance.
And there was a similar case in the source stack, right? Prowess Insurance Brokers. I think of this one as the zombie license case.
Yes, a very, very similar thing. So Prowess had a certificate of registration, their license, that had expired back in September 2021. They had applied for a renewal, but it was still pending.
So they're in a sort of regulatory purgatory. They're not dead, but they're not fully alive either.
Right. And the IFSCA gave them a very clear, very direct instruction. They said, until your renewal is approved, you cannot solicit any new business. You can service your old clients, your existing policies, but no fresh ones.
That seems pretty standard. You're in a holding pattern, so you hold.
Well, Prowess decided to ignore the holding pattern.
Yeah.
They continued to engage in fresh business, signing up new clients, issuing new policies.
Okay, so a clear violation.
A very clear violation. And just like NEO, when the regulator started sending emails asking for data, asking for explanations.
Let me guess. They went silent.
Radio silence. They failed to acknowledge the emails, failed to provide the requested information. It's the same pattern.
Yeah. It really is the silence that damns them, isn't it? It's not just the initial mistake.
It is. I always say, in compliance, communication is your lifeline. If you make a mistake, you own it. You call the regulator, you explain the situation, you present a plan to fix it. If you go silent, the regulator has no choice but to assume the absolute worst. They assume you're hiding something malicious.
And what was the outcome for Prowess? Did they get a warning too?
No, this was far more severe. Prowess had their authorization to operate in the IFSC canceled completely.
So they were kicked out of the zone.
The death penalty.
The corporate death penalty for that entity, yes. The license was revoked.
So I guess the lesson from these two cases is pretty simple. Check your email and, for goodness sake, pick up the phone when the sheriff calls.
It sounds so basic, doesn't it? But administrative compliance, just showing up, answering your mail, responding to queries, it's the very first filter for money laundering. If a company can't even manage the simple admin, they certainly can't be trusted to catch a sophisticated criminal. Okay, let's move up the ladder of complexity now. We've done the invisible crypto exchange and the empty office. Now let's look at what happens when the entity is technically present, the lights are on, but they are functionally blind. This is the case of Way2 Wealth Brokers.
This case is a perfect example of why interregulatory coordination is so absolutely critical to the whole system.
Interregulatory coordination, that's regulator speak for
Yeah.
the different agencies are actually talking to each other.
Exactly. They're not operating in silos. So this case didn't start with the FIU-IND. It started with SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India.
The stock market regulator.
Correct. So SEBI, in its own investigations, had identified certain clients who were involved in things like market manipulation or other shady trading practices. They issued what are called adverse orders against these people.
And an adverse order is basically a public warning sign, right? Like a regulatory wanted poster saying, do not trust this person.
Yes, it's a matter of public record, a big red flag. Now, Way2 Wealth is a stockbroker, and they have these very same people as clients.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So when SEBI publicly says Client X is a market manipulator, Way2 Wealth has an immediate obligation under the PMLA to look at Client X's account with them and say, hey, maybe something is wrong here. This is suspicious.
They need to file a suspicious transaction report, an STR.
They absolutely need to file an SDR, but they didn't. The order states they failed to raise and investigate alerts even after SEBI had publicly flagged these individuals as high risk.
So they were just operating in a bubble. They were processing trades for these clients and completely ignoring the fact that another major regulator was screaming from the rooftops, these guys are crooks.
That is the core failure here. The FIU-IND penalized them specifically for failing to take note of adverse information. The PMLA requires you to continuously monitor your clients. And that monitoring isn't just looking at their bank balance or their transaction volume.
It's about the reputation, too.
It's about their entire risk profile. If they get flagged by SEBI or arrested by the police, or even named in a credible negative media report, you have to act on that information. You have to reassess their risk.
You can't just play dumb.
You cannot play dumb. Willful blindness is not a defense. Now, the fine here was smaller. It was 1 lakh rupees, plus a directive to overhaul their internal alert systems within 30 days.
So about $10,000. Not huge, but not nothing.
Right. But the principle is what's huge. The regulatory system is a network. If a client is deemed toxic in one part of that network, they are considered toxic everywhere. And you, as a reporting entity, are responsible for knowing that. You have to connect the dots.
Which leads us, I think, to the absolute heavyweight champion of our case stack today. This case has everything.
It really does.
It has a foreign state involved. It has a massive gambling syndicate. It has mule accounts. And it has a huge, well-known bank failing spectacularly to stop it. We're talking about Paytm Payments Bank.
This is the kind of case that keeps compliance officers awake at night. This isn't about missing a piece of paperwork or not answering an email. This is about being the plumbing for a massive, organized criminal enterprise.
Let's break down the mechanics of the crime itself first, before we get to the bank's failures. What was this syndicate actually doing?
Okay, so law enforcement had identified a whole network of entities, businesses that were essentially fronts. On the surface, they might have looked like legitimate e-commerce sites or tech companies, but in reality, they were running illegal online gambling, illicit dating services, and unauthorized streaming apps.
And the source material specifically mentions a foreign state. That sounds serious.
It is. It implies that the ultimate beneficiaries, or perhaps the organizers of this whole scheme, were based in a foreign jurisdiction. They were systematically extracting wealth from Indian victims through these gambling and other illicit apps, and then funneling that money offshore.
So you have illegal money coming in from the gamblers and users in India. How did they use Paytm's system to get that money out of the country?
This is where we get into the plumbing, the real mechanics of the laundering. The syndicate used a large number of accounts at Paytm Payments Bank to collect the proceeds from their illegal activities. But they didn't just wire it directly from those accounts. That would be too obvious.
Too easy to trace.
Exactly. They used two key tools, mule accounts and the bank's own payout API service.
Okay, let's define those terms for our listeners. What exactly is a mule account?
A mule account is an account that belongs to a person, often someone who is paid a small fee or is tricked, who allows their legitimate bank account to be used for transferring illegal money. They act as a buffer.
A cutout.
Precisely. So the gambling money doesn't go directly to the criminals. It goes into the mule's account first. Then from the mule's account, it gets transferred to another account and then another. This process is called layering.
And the purpose of layering is to confuse the trail.
It's to break the audit trail, to make it as difficult as possible for law enforcement to trace the money back to the original crime.
Okay, so that's the mule accounts. What about the payout service? What is that, and how did they abuse it?
A payout service, or a payer API, is a feature that banks offer to businesses to make bulk payments very quickly. Think of a company needing to pay salaries to 1,000 employees at once. Instead of doing 1,000 individual transfers, they use the payout service.
It's for legitimate business expenses.
It's supposed to be. But the syndicate weaponized this feature. They used it to push massive amounts of money through these dozens of mule accounts at high speed, disguising all of it as legitimate payouts or business expenses, before ultimately consolidating it and remitting it abroad.
So they were using the bank's own tools for efficiency against the bank itself.
Yes. Speed is the enemy of compliance. The criminals know this. The syndicate used the high-speed, automated payout infrastructure to wash the money before any human could reasonably intervene.
And Paytm just missed this. An entire international gambling ring using their services.
They missed it on a truly grand scale. The FIU-IND investigation identified 34 specific beneficiary accounts that were receiving these proceeds of crime. 34.
Right.
And the bank failed to file a single suspicious transaction report, an STR, on any of these accounts, despite the clear red flags.
34 accounts likely moving massive volumes through this payout API, and not one person at the bank raised a hand and said, hey, this looks weird.
It actually gets worse.
How can it get worse?
The enforcement order highlights that the bank had relied on a non-compliant and unregulated entity to conduct the initial Know Your Customer, the KYC checks, for these clients.
Wait. So they outsourced the most basic fundamental check verifying who the customer is to a company that wasn't even regulated.
That's what the order says. Now, under PMLA Rule 9.2, you are technically allowed to rely on a third party for some aspects of KYC, but there are very strict conditions. The third party has to be regulated themselves, they have to be compliant, and you, the bank, are still ultimately liable. In this case, Paytm seems to have relied on a shady partner to vouch for these customers.
That's like letting a known fox guard the hen house and then acting surprised when all the eggs go missing.
It's a perfect analogy. Because that initial vetting process was so deeply compromised, the front door was basically left wide open. The syndicate just walked in, set up their network of mule accounts, connected them to the payout APIs, and started pumping money out of the country.
And the fine, I assume, reflected the incredible severity of that failure.
It did. 5.49 crore rupees.
Nearly 55 million rupees.
A huge penalty.
It sends such a chilling message to the entire fintech world, doesn't it? You can have the best app, the fastest user interface, the coolest brand, but if your back-end compliance, your nuts and bolts, is relying on bad data or non-compliant partners, you are the one who is liable. You will pay the price.
It also highlights the true meaning of transaction monitoring. It is not enough to just onboard the client properly, even if you do that part right. You have to watch the flow of money continuously. If an entity you've onboarded as a small business is suddenly pushing millions of rupees through a bulk payout API to dozens of random, seemingly unconnected accounts, that is a red flag the size of a billboard.
You cannot miss that.
You are not allowed to miss that. That's what the fine is for.
Okay, so we've looked at Bybit, the evader. We've seen NEO, the ghost office. We've talked about Way2 Wealth, the isolated and blind broker, and now Paytm, the conduit for a criminal syndicate. When you take a step back and look at all these Chapter 7 cases as a whole, what are the common threads? What's the deep dive takeaway that ties them all together?
I think there are three really critical threads here that every single professional in this industry needs to understand. The first, and maybe the most important, is the concept of the principal officer.
The human being in the hot seat.
Exactly, the person whose name is on the line. We saw it so clearly in the NEO case. The physical absence of the officer was in itself the violation. We saw it in the Paytm and Way Too Wealth cases. The catastrophic failure of the systems that the officer is supposed to oversee was the violation.
So the law doesn't just punish the company, this abstract legal entity.
Not at all. The PMLA places specific personal liability on the principal officer and also the designated director. These are not ceremonial titles you just give to someone in the office.
Right.
If the ship hits an iceberg, the captain is held responsible. It's the same principle. If you are a principal officer, these cases are a stark reminder. You must be physically present, you must be actively engaged, and you must have genuine oversight. You cannot just be a rubber stamp signing reports you haven't read or understood.
Okay, so the central role of the principal officer. What's the second thread?
The second is the absolute, undeniable importance of the suspicious transaction report, the STR. In almost every single major penalty we've discussed, the failure to file an STR is the smoking gun.
It's the dog that didn't bark in the night. It's the inaction that proves the crime.
That's a great way of putting it. In the Way Too Wealth case, they saw the SEBI adverse order, but they didn't file an STR. In the Paytm case, they saw the insane transaction volume and the weird patterns, but they didn't file an STR. From the regulator's perspective, filing that STR is your primary duty. If you see something and you say nothing, you are, at best, negligent and at worst, complicit. The entire intelligence system fails without that report.
Okay, so the principal officer and the STR, what's the third thread?
The third thread is that due diligence is an active verb, not a passive one.
Meaning you can't just tick a bunch of boxes on a form when the customer signs up and then forget about them.
You can't. It's not a one-time event. Look at the cases. In the Bybit case, they had to actively register themselves. In the Prowess case, they had to actively stop doing new business. In the Paytm case, they had to actively monitor that payout service for abuse. Willful ignorance is never, ever a defense. You cannot say, oh, I didn't know that third-party KYC provider was non-compliant. It is your job to know. The burden of proof is on you.
It really puts a huge burden on these companies, on these reporting entities. They have to be more than just bankers or brokers. They have to be detectives.
They do, and this brings up a really sensitive and tricky topic that's also mentioned in the source material, the concept of tipping off.
Right. This is the part that always feels like it's straight out of a spy movie. Explain what tipping off is.
Okay, so PMLA Rule 8 is extremely strict about this. When a bank or any reporting entity files an STR to the FIU, they are legally obligated to keep it completely and totally confidential. Most importantly, you cannot, under any circumstances, tell the client, hey, just so you know, we think you're suspicious and we're reporting you to the government.
Which puts the bank staff in an incredibly awkward and frankly dangerous position. You could have a client standing right in front of you at the counter or on the phone trying to move money.
Yeah.
You know they're suspicious. You are at that very moment filing a report against them. But you have to smile and act completely normal.
Yes. You have to maintain that poker face. If you alert them in any way, if you hint that they're under scrutiny, you have just committed the separate, serious crime of tipping off.
And why is that so serious?
Because you've compromised the entire investigation before it can even begin. The criminal might immediately destroy evidence, they might close accounts, they might flee the country. So the compliance officer has to be a detective, an administrator, and a world-class poker player all at the same time.
It really emphasizes that compliance isn't just about administration and paperwork. It's about operational security.
It absolutely is. And these cases, these stories from Chapter 7, they prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the PMLA isn't just some dusty old law book sitting on a shelf. It is a very real, very heavy enforcement hammer. And when it drops hard.
We have covered so much ground today. From the 92 million rupee fine for Bybit and their digital evasion, all the way to the empty chairs in Gift City. It's just so clear that the entire landscape of financial crime is shifting so rapidly.
It is. You have high-speed crypto transactions, you have automated payout APIs that can move millions in minutes, and you have these sophisticated global criminal syndicates.
And what do we have fighting against all that? We have the principal officer, the STR form, and an email inbox.
It really does feel like an arms race, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
The criminals are using AI and automation and every tool at their disposal to layer money faster than ever before. The fundamental question is, can the compliance teams, can the human element possibly keep up? Can they spot the digital mule in a massive data stream before the money is already gone?
That is the big question for the next decade, isn't it?
Yeah.
But for today, for right now, the lesson from these cases is crystal clear. Register your entity, staff your office, watch your transactions, and for the love of everything holy, if the regulator sends you an email,
Open it
open it
and reply to it.
and reply to it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the PMLA. Stay curious, stay compliant, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Stay well